Good good afternoon now. It's 12:03. My name is Maria Thacker-Gothi. I am President and CEO of Georgia Bio. It is a pleasure to have you all with us. I think most of y'all are joining us from the Augusta region. It is a pleasure to connect out there. I certainly wish we were meeting in person, but hopefully, I expect at this time next year, we will be able to do that again. But Georgia Bio is pleased to be able to put on this event on public-private partnerships and really show how we as Georgia Bio and now the Center for Global Health Innovation are here to enable the partners we have in the Augusta region to connect better and more effectively with corporate partners we've started to cultivate due to our COVID response, and also just continue to be a resource for those researchers and innovators that are coming out of the Outstanding Research University, AU. So a few housekeeping items. This will be an interactive event, and towards the end, we're gonna have some questions back and forth with Ken and Steve, our speakers today. But please start to populate the Q&A with any questions. We wanna make sure that we're allowing an opportunity for you all to get your questions answered and let your voices be heard. I will also say that those who might be joining us that may work in the medical device and diagnostic space, we are in the pre-planning time for our MedTech and Digital Health Summit. That's going to take place at the end of May. If you're interested in getting involved with that, please send us a note at any of our emails that will end up in either Christina Forbes' hands or mine. And we look forward to making sure that AU is well represented. And of course, any companies in the Augusta region are well represented at that event in May. Finally, on April 1st, we will be having our annual awards dinner. Yes, it will be virtual again, but we're very excited to honor those that have been responding to COVID and throughout our community. If you would like to submit a digital short, just 10 to 30 seconds on what you've been doing in response to COVID for the community or even your company, we would certainly welcome that. Additionally, we'll be honoring a number of different outstanding researchers and partners from Augusta at the awards. So if any of you are joining, congratulations, and we look forward to honoring you on April 1st. Again, please do get registered in advance so we can have an accurate head count for the event and make sure you have the login. So with that, again, please put any Q&A into the question at the bottom of your screen. And I look forward to getting started. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Chris McKinney with Augusta University and an excellent partner and longtime board member with Georgia Bio. Chris?
Maria, thank you so much. And I want to extend a warm welcome to everybody attending this event today. What a timely topic, the right time, the right issue, the right group. We're so excited at AU for all the innovation that's happening in our state and region, and certainly in our local community. We're a business of connections, we're a business of relationships, and we're a business around solving real problems, such as in the COVID space. AU, for example, has been centrally involved with testing and treatment with COVID cases. North of 200,000 3D printed swabs for getting the test. Many test assays done here. We developed our own, and a lot of people treated. We played a pretty big role around the state in this process, and I'm really proud about that effort. But also it's not just Augusta, it's not just AU, it's really this larger community of which we're a proud part. And I mentioned that we're in a business of relationships, and I would say small world connections. I was just visiting with the person I'll introduce, Ken Berta, and it turns out we have common friends in the business of medical devices. We have a large relationship with Philips. Ken's come from Philips. We have people in common, and that's how this business works. It's all about meeting people, knowing people, doing things together. With that, Ken, I'd like to ask you to kick it off, and let's start the show.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it, and thanks for having me here. These are great topics for the times we're in right now to look at innovation and how partnering supports that moving forward, and how collaboration can really multiply 1 + 1 to equal, or add 1 + 1 to equal 3. I started my career, just a little background on me, as a researcher with the VA, looking at artificial organs and biometric devices, and moved from there into emergency medicine. I spent about 10 years in emergency medicine all over the world, looking at how healthcare is delivered into the field, working with both militaries, but also big municipalities and mass casualty units on how medicine can be delivered to sites. I moved from that into managing a large nonprofit that combined 5 universities in Ohio: Ohio State, Kent State, University of Cincinnati, University of Dayton, and Wright State, called the Wright Center of Innovation for Advanced Data Management and Analysis, which was a collaboration amongst 60 companies, those 5 universities, and the Air Force Research Labs, which are also located in Dayton, Ohio. There are 9 different directorates in the Air Force Research Laboratories, everything from human effectiveness to air vehicles to advanced manufacturing. A lot of opportunity to then bring academic know-how into the commercial world, supported by government requirements. And that triad of working with the public sector and the private sector to build those partnerships is something that I've spent a lot of time in my career on. When I moved to Philips right after that to launch a laboratory diagnostics group within the company, once that was grown and was absorbed into the broader divisions of the company, I moved into a role to work in strategy, leading the corporate partnerships and alliances group on how we can better interact with partners on behalf of our clients. For example, Augusta. How can we work with companies like Dell? And this is how I met Steve Laser as well, who will introduce himself here in a second. But how do we help leverage the investments that have already been made in healthcare to support products and innovations that are going in and working with those? So in doing that, started working with Emory on the Innovation Hub that they developed. From there, I was introduced to this fantastic opportunity to build a global 911 in Atlanta with all the resources, the CDC and the university network in Georgia, as well as the big corporations that are really come together in Georgia to support these kind of efforts. And when COVID kicked off and there was an opportunity to lead this part of the organization, it was a great fit for me and a great opportunity to start working in this area of global health crisis coordination. I'd like to introduce Steve Laser. He can talk a little bit about his background as well and some of the work that he does with Dell and Dell Technologies.
And thank you very much, Ken. I do appreciate it. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I guess it is afternoon on the east side of the world. My name is Stephen Laser. I am the Global Healthcare and Life Sciences CTO with Dell Technologies. I come at the role with about 24 years in healthcare at this point, so still kind of a newbie, still learning about it because fortunately for me, healthcare changes just about every day and there are new things to learn, new ways to apply technology and new things to do. In my role at Dell Technologies, for which I feel extremely fortunate, I have the luxury of literally wandering around the world, having conversations around healthcare, and being able to advise our customers, whether they be at the government level, whether they be at the healthcare system level, or even at the individual hospital level, ways that we can apply technology to either improve clinicians' lives, improve patients' lives, change outcomes, and really deliver care in a different manner than we have in the past. At the same time, I have this very large and very powerful machine behind me known as Dell Technologies, which really offers me the opportunity to get advanced looks at technologies, where they're going, what are the new things that are coming out. As a matter of fact, I know the team was a little nervous. I hadn't joined the call quite as early as everyone had hoped, but I was on with one of the processor manufacturers to have a discussion about what their future roadmap looks like in order to understand how that can be applied to healthcare. What does it mean for what we deliver in healthcare? What does it mean from a technology perspective? How can we improve the AI capabilities and things like that? And for those of you that haven't met me yet, which I am guessing is a large part of the crowd, I'm extremely passionate about healthcare. It's what I live for. It's why I do what I do. It's either that or be retired, one of the two. So I felt very fortunate when Ken called me up one day and asked me to come join and be part of GHC3 and finding ways that we can support them. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Maria.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. And we really appreciate you joining. I know how busy everyone is, especially our partners at Dell. And I think I'm going to ask Ken and Steve to go ahead and stay on video while we do this some Q&A and start to learn about how Dell's partner with GHG3, how both of y'all approach public-private partnerships and challenges you may run into, and really start to understand what y'all bring to the table. So what we're doing in my capacity at the Center for Global Health Innovation, of which Georgia Bio is a division, is really working to break down barriers between life sciences, health technology, and global health. I think this has been something we've been working on for a few years leading up to the rollout of the center, which will formally take place this summer, but is really to understand how we can facilitate better collaboration. And COVID has exacerbated that need and in many ways proven the need to more effectively communicate across these three important sectors that work to improve health for communities and people around the world. So, Ken, maybe you could kick this off and talk about a bit how GHG3 has been able to leverage private sector partners like Dell in a way that focuses on the equitable delivery of public health. And feel free to, I know y'all have some slides around this work, but just talk about that. That would be great. Thanks.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of need as we started getting into, if I just look at the COVID crisis that we were born into here. How do we support the agencies, whether it's FEMA or it's the CDC or it's the NIH, in getting to the public what they need? A lot of that is technology and technological capabilities. For example, in the early days, starting to look at testing. How do we acquire data? How do we store data? How do we manage that data? How do we feed it back so that we understand where the virus is, how it's moving, how it's impacting the public? That ability to register people for testing, do the testing, move the laboratory data at such a scale across the country is very important. And being able to work with someone like Dell, who understands how to scale big data, is very important to be able to apply that information back into new applications that the CDC or some of the agencies were trying, because a lot of this was still new. While there is testing that happens on a routine basis, never at this volume where we're trying to get up to 25 million tests a week. So when you're talking about scaling these and talking the challenges that are there, how do we work with partners that are doing this every day with hospitals around the country and see how we can expand that platform to leverage what they have? And fortunately, Dell has a very large practice in healthcare in the US. Many of the big hospital networks leverage Dell technologies. So they had a lot of insight into how we can move this forward. And they were one of the partners we leaned on to look at how we can build out better data ingestion tools. And how we can do better visualization and the sharing of that information, how we can clean that data and integrate it, and then supply that back to public health officials so they knew what to do next. What is the next area we should focus on? How do we set priorities? And you've probably heard a lot in the news on how reporting was happening, and early on these systems were very stretched. And some of them really burn out at times at certain states on how to keep track of what our bed capacity was, or what our testing rates were, what our positivity rates in those testings could be. And that's just accelerated as we've moved through the COVID pandemic here, because now we're looking at how do we acquire and leverage information from sequencing. Genomic sequences are it's a lot of data. And these are things that partners like Dell know how to manage. But if we're looking at ramping up sequencing, which will then help us understand the variants and the mutations of this virus, we can start to then build targeting capabilities to say, here's where the variants are most active, therefore here's where we should focus some of our attention in vaccine delivery. So that's just an example of how the private side of the world can support what we lean a lot on the government to do, and how we as coordinators at GHG3 can help pull those together. So we do meet frequently with the CDC officials to talk about priorities, what's important, what are some of the key challenges, and then how can we organize and pull together the private sector in a way that we can quickly, extend impact on those issues. Oh, you're muted, Maria.
background noise here. So thank you, Ken, that's very helpful. And I know we have other projects like Back to School and others that you've been able to harness the private sector around. But Steve, I'd be curious to hear from you a bit. You know, speaking of priorities, we were all thrust into COVID together last year. You know, how did you and Dell start to approach you know, identifying what priorities you all had and helping respond to COVID, and how did maybe even your work with Ken help support that and achieving that, and maybe even how they're starting to pivot as we start to see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. So as we first started learning about pandemic, we saw a few things from some of our compatriots actually over in China that were actually part of Dell Technologies, asking us some questions as the healthcare team within Dell. We finally dug up a few research papers and got an idea as to what this was and what was going on. When it was discovered that we were really seeing the illness rates and the mortality rates that we were, Dell Technologies took a very different approach. First of all, as the U.S. started to move into pandemic mode, Dell Technologies, first of all, paused their supply chain for just a moment to figure out what do we have in supply chain, where is it going. All shipments were directed based upon a war room that met every single morning. Those shipments of products and services were prioritized. Number one was our government and Department of Defense. Number two, going from there, was healthcare. And with that, how do we supply healthcare? Going from there, other approaches that we have participated in, whether it be directly through us or in combination with some other partners, building things like field hospitals, and standing those up around the globe, actually. And I think U.S., U.K., some over in Asia. I honestly don't know where at this point. It's been a long time, but being able to stand up those environments immediately. I mean, we literally dropped everything and changed direction right there from a corporate perspective, as well as from a technology perspective. Following that, it's really starting to define how we can do things like work from remote and really pushing work from remote capabilities, looking at the security side of things, because as we all go to work from remote, we open up that door from a security perspective. And unfortunately, healthcare has now become the favorite target of those that are looking to do some damage and or try to steal some information. And those challenges continue to increase, and you're going to find that Dell is going to increase its security posture for the healthcare field, something that should be announced here in the next few days, and bringing additional tools to bear and additional tools to market. To go along with that, working on some of the communication challenges, whether it be education, whether it be healthcare related, but helping support some of those communication challenges that we first encountered, and really starting to find new ways that we can deliver on these technologies. Frankly, giving away hardware to those that needed it and worry about getting paid later, or if at all. Some cases it doesn't matter. I know that we found some devices that were not going to be utilized, and we worked with Ken and team to find ways that they could be utilized to support COVID and be able to deliver a few hundred thin client devices out to one of your partners as GHC3 and make a difference in the world. I mean, this is what it's all about. To go along with that, partnering with Ken on delivering things like virtual care and being able to do some things around the vulnerable populations of the world, and really starting to make an impact there. That's really how we started out, is looking at that, and then pandemic was upon us all of a sudden to add a little bit of fuel to the fire. So going from there, it's been a great partnership. Ken and I probably are talking a couple of times a week right now, and we have a lot going on, but that's part of what it takes to make this happen.
Great. No, thank you for that, Steve. And thank you for the continued work and partnership. You know, I think it'd be really interesting to hear a bit, Ken, on that early partnership we had with Dell, with CDC Foundation, to show how we're connecting the nonprofit world with our corporate partners.
Sure. Very early on, Dell, through Dell Giving and a lot of the work Steve did himself here, put together a package of seat licenses and hardware and software to be able to deliver or gather information from vulnerable populations who weren't being seen. That turned into a program with the Special Olympics and with large nursing home facilities to look at how their workforce and their patients could be monitored from a distance. And that information can be shared then quickly with the CDC. The Special Olympics is a center of the CDC for those with intellectual disabilities. And part of what they do is these remote health checks. And Steve and his team were able to put together a device that could do biometric information gathering from optical, even ear exams. It's a really slick technology that we can then look to push out into the field so that the Special Olympics medical team has the ability to check on the athletes that they have. And the Special Olympics serves almost 7 million athletes around the world. So it's a big project. We're just starting the pilots in certain areas to look at how we can help them get back to normal. A lot of the health checks that they did happened at the events that they put on, and since those events no longer existed, they weren't quite sure how this population was doing and how they were getting health care. And through some of the virtual technologies that Dell has, we were able to put together a project. They donated that through the CDC Foundation, and then GHC3 was able to help find the right clients for it, make the connections with the groups out there that had some need, so that we could set up these projects and move them forward and share that data back for further research. So that's just one of our projects. And I will add on to a comment that Steve made, something that you don't really think about until you're in the middle of it. But as everybody moved to working remotely and doing school remotely, there was such a rush on laptops and the ability to connect with the internet that the whole market just was overrun. And the Dell team was very helpful in helping to supply schools to make sure that learning continued to happen. The Dell consultants joined us at one of our back to school sites, which is a program we put together working with the CDC on taking one school through the guidance so that there was a solid understanding of what it took to put mitigations in place to safely reopen, but also understanding what were the impacts of learning management systems and the remote use of those, which was still somewhat new and probably getting pretty tired at this point to a lot of folks that have children.
Thank you, Kent. Thanks for touching on that. So I want to pivot more into classic partnerships. Ken or Steve, because you're coming from two different perspectives here, could y'all touch on any guiding principles that you may lean on when you're starting a new partnership or relationship? That could be with a nonprofit, another corporation, or even an academic institution. I think, this community in particular at AU would be welcome understanding how Steve may start to, Dell would want to approach a partnership with a research university and learn what needs are. So whoever, Ken, you look like you're itching to go first.
Sure. And even with my time at Philips, Dell was a strong partner at Harvard and Mass General in the Partners Innovation Hub that they had in Massachusetts on how to build out new data sets and what they called the patient commons or a big data lake. That is a program that even from Michael Dell, from the top down, Dell was very interested in supporting these kind of research efforts in healthcare to move those forward. And Philips really was just the application that was going to be layered on top of that to make it happen. But a lot of how we form these partnerships is all around alignment. Who has capability? Is it in the strategic direction of their company to do so? What are their interests in global and public health? Because obviously we don't want to pull people in who work in other industries and don't really have a strategic plan to move into healthcare. But if they do, and we can leverage some of the subject matter expertise we can bring at GHC3 anyhow to that direction to understand the impacts on global health that technology can make, be able to provide a platform for folks to do rapid testing and pilot building. Is there appetite for doing that? That's another one of the metrics that we put in front of how we do our work. And then how do we look internationally, because we are a global organization. So can we take the learnings we have here in a very well-funded healthcare network and health system in the US and try to apply some of those learnings to other low and middle income countries around the world? And Dell is a global company and has fit into a lot of this nicely for us, which is why we have such a strong partnership here. But I'll let Steve talk about where that comes from a technology company and how it impacts their growth and things they're looking for.
And from a Dell Technologies perspective, yes, we do many partnerships from on the healthcare side of the world, not to mention other perspectives. And with that, as you look at where we go from a partnership perspective, the first place that we start off is by doing one thing and only one thing, and that is listening to what we can do and how we can impact the world. From our senior leadership, being Michael Dell, all the way down through the healthcare team, Michael has set a very substantial goal, and that is to positively impact the lives of 1 billion people by 2030. And with that, being able to positively impact their well-being, their health, their ways of life, and really changing their outcomes on life in a positive fashion. We take that goal very seriously. Yes, Dell sells products and our sales teams have quotas for product. The healthcare team also has a quota for impacting the world, believe it or not. And it is something that we work towards every single day. As a part of that team and providing the ability to impact other organizations around the world, we start off by listening to what is needed for the partnership. From there, we go in and look at what's in the bag of tricks. I think I have the easiest job in the world because I have this amazing bag of tricks that I can dig in and find tools and find pieces of those tools that I can apply, whether it be the entire tool set or not the entire tool set. We have many partnerships around the world. I currently am working in partnership with 3 children's hospitals here in the U.S., working with a group that is doing volunteer work in Ghana. And Ken, we need to follow up on Ghana. I forgot.
Yes.
As a side note, I apologize. That's the way my head works. But with that, as we start looking at ways that we can impact those people's lives, we look at how we can bring together the technology, the partnerships. I understand technology. I understand what we can do with all of these things. It's just really twisting it and how we can apply it to healthcare and finding the right places to partner so that we can positively impact the world and really move the needle on healthcare. And it's not just about the patients, it's also about the caregivers, quite frankly. One of the biggest places that we played as immediately after things started to settle in and we started to understand this pandemic a little bit was moving everyone remote. And this sometimes included physicians and nursing staff in the hospital system, simply by placing a device in the patient room that they can use for video and have conversations with the patients to check on them and or monitor stats while they're not necessarily dressing up in PPE, while they're not necessarily having to take the time to do that, and be able to go ahead and monitor 5 or 6 patients or more patients at a time. And really starting to change that delivery model. Those are the things that we look for in partnerships. How do we do the greatest amount of good? We have a group that is called Dell Giving within the organization, and myself and one other person, his name is David Diamond, drive a lot of what we do on the healthcare side with Dell Giving and really look at ways that we can apply technology to make those things happen.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks for sharing more about that resource. So we find that partnerships are rarely easy, and I think we all can agree with that statement, and we often have to overcome cultural and a communication divide that can impair the relationship. I think it's ever apparent in industry and university partnerships in particular, and it can undercut the potential of that relationship, of that partnership. Can you speak to actual challenges that you've run into and you hear from partners while developing these partnerships?
It's a very poignant topic, actually. Working with a very large university that focuses on cancer research and cancer care. Our biggest challenge is, as we develop intellectual property, who has ownership, who has rights? And Dell's perspective is that if we're funding the research, we expect to have at least rights, if not ownership. And the research university is looking to own all the intellectual property and negotiate rights. That's our biggest one, by far. Everything else can usually be worked out, but that one is a bit of a sticky point. We are a commercial business, and we do this to generate funding and profits, and we need to find a way that we can work together in order to make that research happen, at the same time allow each organization to take away from it what it needs.
Great, and then I'm sure Chris will have some thoughts on that a little later. That's certainly a concern and challenge I think we hear from the university side as well. Ken?
Well, I could speak for a long time about intellectual property rights, because at the Wright Center we had 60 companies and 5 universities to deal with. But I think a lot of it comes down to what's the best chance for that technology to reach the market. A lot of innovation has been done in these partnerships. How do we make sure it gets in, it finds utility? Too many programs that get funded and developed never make it out of the research phase, because many times we spend too much time talking about who's going to own what and where it can go, and who's going to make money off of it and how that works. I often use the Gatorade example of a big success story for the University of Florida, when Stokely's built an engine to be able to supply funding back to that university from the sales of Gatorade. And it became an early model for how that would happen. But when you add new technology and the cost of marketing and other things to move a product out the door, it really starts to lean the other way in where the funds have to come from to make that product available and get it into the hands of those who are going to use it. So there's a lot of push and pull, and even big partners that we used to have, like P&G, really had to balance how much they could work with academic partners versus how much did they want to do research on their own. And this drove even big universities like Ohio State to finding different ways to manage their intellectual property in a way that it was attractive to their corporate partners. But IP aside, there are still other challenges for us at GHC3, since we work with multiple companies in single sectors. They're in the market, it's sometimes competitors for supporting each other. Steve and his team is great about working with Microsoft and their team on architecting new data challenges and opportunities to ingest and analyze masses of public health data, because they both see the value in doing that. But we want to stay aligned with, who gets value from that and how we move that forward. How does it move everybody in a direction that is positive for them? So in a sense, how does everybody win from these type of collaborations? We have the same challenges, I'll admit, with NGOs, right? As big NGOs come together and say, hey, we want to do some work together, they still have their funding stream to protect, their philanthropic funding. They don't want to really get you to get in front of that, as they work together. So how do you align and make sure everybody stays in their lane to be able to bring technologies to public health quickly? And then there's the government side of that, which is how do you work, what I would say, outside the fence in a collaborative way that can then help inform the government on new technologies that are out there. Because a lot of innovation that we focus on, especially in global health, is not necessarily new technology innovations. It is innovative uses of a technology that already exists. There's a lot out there, and oftentimes we see, if I just compare Walmart to your local hospital, right? Walmart knows what you buy, when you buy, they know who you are, they know what your habits are, you get coupons at home. You don't have to show an individual ID every time and a different card. They know what your number is, or they just put your phone number in. You can't do that at the hospital when you go to register. You're asked again for your insurance, like this is the first time they met you. So how do you start to build that relationship between the patient and the hospital in a way that you can leverage tools that already exist in the retail world, for example, so that you can stay closer to that customer? And a lot of what EMR companies are doing now, and Steve and I have a lot of experience in this, and I'm sure Augusta does with their Cerner partnership. How do we use those type of platforms to stay connected with patients and between patients and providers? And can we leverage that same technology to have an appointment so you don't really need to go? As Steve was saying, you don't need to leave the house to do a quick health check. If you can, weigh yourself and do your own blood pressure and pulse ox at home, you can share that information directly with the doctor over the phone and save yourself the trip there. They can move through patients faster, and that information is easily digitized so that the record is made quickly. I had a doctor's appointment early this morning, as a matter of fact, and it was in a new location, and I had to drive there. This is the first time they were open for in-person visits. So as I went in, I had to reestablish myself as a patient and give my insurance card and all those kind of things again. And she then handed me a sheet that said, hey, if you wanted next time, all you have to do is do a pre-registration online, and you don't have to stop here and do that. You can go right to the room. So that technology is happening. It's just how can we spread it out and make sure it gets to everyone who needs it. And a big thing that GHC3 works on is the ideas around health equity, which is important. And I'm sure Maria can talk some about that too. But our focus is really on public health. Really focuses on that health equity issue. The inequities that the COVID virus has really shown a bright light on, and who can get vaccinated, who can get tested, and the health impact on those populations is easy to see on the mortality and morbidity rates of minority groups and of folks that are in the hourly workforce. All of these things are important to understand. Access to healthcare is that next frontier. And a lot of the virtual healthcare tools that we talked to Dell about will help address some of those issues.
No, that helps me pivot a little bit into asking you, Ken, to touch on some of our equity work project, specifically COVID potentially. I think it'd be really interesting. The demographics in the Augusta region are actually, I think they're over 60% African American or Black. And I know that we're specifically being funded to help with some of the work there, and maybe there are ways even partners out there might be able to help support the work for the project with CDC.
Sure. Well, I'll talk about that briefly, and there's a data component to that as well. But what we have been challenged with in COVID is an information equity program. How do we get information about vaccine acceptance? So we're trying to reduce vaccine hesitancy with partners from Johns Hopkins and Emory to look at a more targeted approach to ethnographic research that can then turn into messaging that can then be tested in a cycle so that we can see that we're getting to those individuals. And this results in creating a persona. So if there is a large African American population of male adults between 25 and 34, we have a breakdown of how they receive information, what influences them, how can that be built, and how do we build messages that inform without demanding, right? We want to put information in people's hands so they can make a positive decision on their own without saying, oh, this just take your medicine. You just need to do that. And that addresses some of the anti-vaccine statements, some of the concerns around vaccine and pregnancy and other things that are out there that we just need to get that information that's science-based into the hands of folks in a way that they can understand it and from voices that they trust. And that's really what the program's all about. And that's a nationwide program. We're working on, I think, 10 different regions in the country to do this kind of work. And it'll build a guide on how we can do that for any public health issue, not just for the COVID vaccine delivery, but any vaccine delivery. Why should you get your flu shot when sometimes you still get the flu? What's the science behind that? Why is it still important that I do so? How does that reduce my risk of further health challenges down the road? That kind of information, how do we get it into those voices? And with things like Twitter and Google, who are also in Facebook, who are all very supportive of these programs, that's their business. Twitter focuses on influencers for a very small population that they want to get information to in the Twitterverse and how they work that. So like I said earlier, the technology is there on how to do that work. And this type of ethnographic research has been done at a very high level with big retailers on understanding how do they market to specific types of customers. Can we apply that kind of behavioral algorithm to public health? It's not a huge lift, but it's just understanding what's the information we want to push out and how do we make that happen. And we're now reaching out to you know, the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Muslim community, as we look at all of the different sub-communities within the U.S. and how they're influenced. And each one of those communities is broken down into even subgroups of its own that receive information that are in some ways more liberal leaning or more conservative leaning, even within one of those groups. So how do we communicate with them, and who do they listen to? Everything from radio stations to where they shop and those kind of things. We found a lot of success in Baltimore, for example, on putting information in barbershops, beauty salons, and laundromats, because that's where people of those communities congregate, read information, and can talk about it with each other. So it's not just handing you information, it's how do we communicate with others that understand it the same way. And I think this will lead to ways that we can work on vaccinations and testing and contact tracing and other things as we move forward around the world, not just here in the US.
Yeah, and I know
So-
we're seeing a drop in testing, which is a concern
Right.
of CDC and others because of the vaccine focus. So we still have a few hills to climb here as we work through this. So I want to ask people to submit any questions into the Q&A. I've got one more question for Steve and Ken, and you know, it's the same question, but I really, you know, like to hear, Steve, your perspectives on this. Apologies, it dropped away from my screen. Here we go. You know, you're aware that GHG3, we host a number of different types of roundtables, the private sector and the NGO world. And from that, we're able to hear from them what are their biggest issues. Everything we're working on is, the way we approach things is really problem-based innovation and response. Could you talk about where you're seeing opportunities for innovation as we, you know, move towards coming out of this pandemic from maybe the Dell perspective?
From an innovation point of view, I think there are many opportunities there, and those opportunities really revolve around a couple of different things. First of all, healthcare adopted virtual care, or actually telemedicine, very, very quickly and without much regard for security and capabilities there. We've kind of already touched on that point. In that we've opened up a number of endpoints. We have a lot of concerns around what healthcare has done already. I think as you see healthcare systems look at evaluating what they've done from a telemedicine perspective, you're going to see things shift quite significantly. The innovation is going to turn into more of an operational change within healthcare and a workflow change within healthcare, to where we suddenly have care teams that are assigned to virtual care clinics that are essentially, they look like a call center. They're not, they're a clinic. And they're still treating patients, but they're treating patients at the edge from a virtual care perspective. Their patient load capabilities are significantly greater, 5 to 10 times greater than what we would normally see for a caregiver in a given physical situation. I would not want to be a property owner today as far as a commercial healthcare property owner today, because unfortunately, a lot of what's been vacated will only wind up being filled with additional capabilities and new functionalities that we see coming forward. The treasure trove of data that's being collected as well is another point of innovation, and being able to mine that data and look for other answers within that data really starts to bring forward other opportunities there. From a Dell Technologies point of view, some of the other things that we have seen is that, and for good, bad, or somewhere in between, this moving everyone out of the office has simply renewed an interest in essentially laptops and desktops for us, which is kind of a silly thing if you ask me. But at the same time, instead of having one laptop or desktop in the home or one computer in the home, we suddenly have one per person in the home, which has really changed Dell Technologies quite a bit as to where we spend some of our time and efforts. That, and looking at some of the more advanced forms of not only computer vision capabilities, but also looking at other AI capabilities that are coming forward to really draw additional insights, be able to provide automation capabilities around reading information or understanding information. You know, if we take even just a simple CR study and being able to go ahead and read that and discard the normal studies so that they don't require further examination by a radiologist, suddenly increases their productivity 100-fold. The numbers are crazy. Digital pathology is just coming into its own, and good, bad, or indifferent, pathologists are you're laughing at me,
Yeah, well,
but they're kind of a dying breed, Ken.
yes.
Trying to find people that want to go to work and reading those studies, we need the pathologists. So how do we make it easier to bring the data to the pathologists? How do we get them to read from wherever they are, once again, and be able to have those studies presented to them and be able to share them with their colleagues worldwide?
Yeah, the globalization to that point of virtual care is not just between the home and the clinician, but it also entails things for or items like I'll use Augusta as an example here, where there's a capability in the Augusta ICU system to be able to have remote monitoring from other parts of the world. Even at Emory, there's a center that was built to do monitoring of Australian hospitals on night shifts, so they can trade back and forth the day-night program, so that we're fully staffed, and the staff that you have can be spread further to move that forward. A pathology piece that Steve just mentioned also impacts the pharmaceutical companies and the biologic developers on how they can see more samples, more images, rather than it being held on a glass slide. You now have a digital image that can have AI put against it to understand what type of cancer is this, how is it growing, and how can that be shared with the pharma industry to build better therapeutics against that particular drug. Another piece of our COVID project, just to tie these two things together, as we look at building these cohorts for new drug discovery in clinical trials, one of the things that's been an issue and has been really highlighted in the COVID vaccine is that the clinical trials didn't include enough people from certain minority groups. So how can we do better recruiting with, this type of persona development to reach out to those communities and engage them more in pharmaceutical and clinical trial drug development? So just a couple of innovations out there.
No, great.
Well,
I'm sorry.
one other quick comment on the clinical trial point, Ken, is that how do we take and make clinical trials not regional?
Right.
How do we make them virtual and spread them across the globe? You talk about certain sectors of the population, but clinical trials typically are regional within a given country. What would happen if we ran a clinical trial in 160 countries?
Right. And if we look at the clinical trials that were run for this vaccine, I mean, the typical vaccine includes a cohort of about 4,000 people. We're talking about vaccines now that are being developed with cohorts of 40,000 people. And if we can extend that internationally, now we have so many subgroups, which brings a lot of what used to take time and years of time in understanding the impact of a drug on a certain population. When you can expand it to include much larger cohorts, you can really compress the time to market and understanding of safety of that drug very quickly, which was evident here in Operation Warp Speed's work.
Great. Well, we only have about 9 minutes left. I want to present the opportunity for anyone to ask any questions, of course. And, Chris, I know you're still on here too. If you had any questions in particular you wanted to pose to Ken or Steve, that would be welcome. No pressure. I have others I can go with, but.
Well, I was going to say earlier, there was a good conversation around the challenges of intellectual property rights in collaborations. And one of the things I tend to say to my company friends is, please don't view the university as a dysfunctional company, and we won't view you as a dysfunctional university. We're all kind of different, so we're driven by different things. And I think there's always a point we can meet. I'm an optimist here, and I can say honestly, in doing this business for a long time, I've had relatively very, very few deals falter on IP. Have I had to work it out? Yeah, but I've had very few actually fall through the cracks, including like automotive consortiums with 60 members, including universities and companies, or healthcare consortia. So it gets done, but something that happens with universities that, this is more commentary than question, I guess, but is that oftentimes we have a history too. For example, we may have done some work with Merck or some work with Microsoft or some work with Medtronic that precedes our work with you. So it ends up, we also have a history to kind of navigate. At the end of the day, though, universities are working hard, I think, to be more and more adaptable and accommodating, and frankly, to develop different solutions for different relationships. I mean, for example, you probably know this, when we do clinical trials, the IP there is easy because we know the sponsors bringing the drug. We're not going to mess up their portfolio. Maybe there are some clinical trial analogs for some of the stuff we're talking about here. So let me ask this question. Have you seen these kinds of relationships with the academic world get easier, harder, or stay about the same?
I think this is just me talking because I was on the innovation circuit for a long time as a former Autumn member and speaker of how we can do this better with big companies. It is, I think, dependent on the university's view towards becoming part of that business creation community. In some centers, where there are economic development capabilities, centers that come together and really form an ecosystem. We've seen that because there's a lot of volume there. It isn't just this one innovation, there's going to be 20, and next year there's going to be 30, because we brought an ecosystem together of companies that build on each other and maybe share with each other to make that happen. But if you're a standalone university and I won't name names, but some of those in the Northeast that can be a little bit more difficult to work with because they believe that ground truth started with them, and we need to own that. So it's really hard to get them out of that cycle of here's what we need to own, and if you don't like that, well, then go work with somebody else. So it for a company like Philips, who set up shop in Cambridge, right, to try to tap into that community, it started out as somewhat challenging, but as we got down to the clinician level and then could apply that as Partners Healthcare really combined with the universities more, where it was about getting the innovations in practice, it loosened up quite a bit there to make that happen.
We only have about 5 minutes. I didn't have any questions from the audience, so I just wanted to see if there were any closing comments from either of you all before Chris and I close it out.
I think Steve was going to say something, but you might be on mute.
Oh, sorry. I can't see everybody at one time. Sorry. Sorry, Steve.
Sorry. No worries. And Chris, yes, I was going to add a little bit of commentary to your question here, and that in this situation, we're dealing with a cultural issue as we're working outside the U.S. Inside the U.S., I've never had a challenge that I can even think of. I think we've always been able to reach agreements, and typically they revolve around if it's technology development, licenses granted on a perpetual basis, and commercialization goes back to those that funded the research. Very simple.
Great. Well, Chris, do you have any last comments for our speakers, and before I close this out?
Well, first off, I really want to thank Steve and Ken for bringing these important perspectives. I mean, this is a real-time business we're talking about, but it's also a business we're trying to learn from. I mean, COVID, the pandemic, is a very difficult time worldwide. And if there is a silver lining, it's that I think we're learning a lot about how to work with each other and how to work on a real, true, some would call it the Jersey speed or Manhattan speed approach, which is it can't just wait till whenever or a committee meeting. It's got to happen now. And we've been doing that here in the testing realm, and I know others have too. So I appreciate what you're both talking about and how we can all work together going forward. Thanks again.
Thank you, Chris. Steve, any last comments?
Other than thank you very much for having me, really not. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Steve. We appreciate your ongoing partnership, and you taking the time to join us today. Ken, any closing remarks before I?
Yeah, I just hope that we can maintain this momentum. What this pandemic has done is, as Chris mentioned, is be able to pull us together around a common cause, and it's really brought to corporations and public health alike the need to work together and understand how they can impact each other. And I think from the corporate perspective, these companies are going to go away with, we need to pay a little bit more attention to public health and the health of our employees in a different way. And so I hope we can maintain that momentum going forward.
Great. No, I certainly agree. And it's certainly needed because even beyond this pandemic, we still have a lot of inequities we need to address around all types of different issues. So thank you all. As everyone leaves, again, I remind you to join us next week on April 1st for our awards dinner, and be sure to make sure you're on our email list so you can participate in future events. We at Georgia Bio and the Center for Global Health Innovation, we're here to connect, convene, educate, and advocate on behalf of all of our industries, life sciences, health tech, and global health. And we're really here to help you all, enable you all to improve health equity and address crises here and around the world. So thank you again to our partners in Augusta. Thank you, Chris and Becky and the team within the research piece of AU. And thank you to our speakers. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I hope you all continue to stay safe and well and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.